You walk through the front door after a long day, and before you've even set your bag down, something lands at your feet. A sock, a chewed tennis ball, sometimes a leaf from the backyard. Once, memorably, a dead bird. Your dog is standing there, tail moving like a metronome set to maximum, eyes locked on your face, waiting for something. You laugh, maybe. You say thank you in the voice you only use for the dog. You take it, and then you move on with your evening, probably without asking the one question that actually matters. Why? Not in the casual sense. Not the, oh, isn't that adorable sense. Why specifically does your dog do this? And only with you? Why this object and not another? Why right now, at the exact moment you appear? Why does their expression look less like here's a toy and more like something that doesn't have a clean translation into human? Behavioral researchers and animal cognition scientists have been trying to answer that question for decades. And what they've found doesn't just explain the behavior. It changes the way you see your dog entirely. Because what you're holding in your hand isn't a gift in the way you've been thinking about it. It's a sentence. Let's start with where this behavior actually comes from, because the answer goes back much further than your living room. Long before dogs lived in houses, before there were houses, their ancestors, wolves, were organized around a system of coordinated sharing. When a hunt was successful, food wasn't just consumed at the site. Pack members would carry portions back. They would deliver to nursing mothers, to older animals, to those who had stayed behind. What that behavior established over thousands of generations wasn't just a feeding system, it was a social currency. Bringing something of value to another member of the group was one of the primary ways bonds were maintained. Hierarchies were expressed, and belonging was communicated. Dogs have been domesticated for somewhere, between 15 and 40,000 years depending on who you ask. Their social structure changed dramatically. Their relationship with humans reshaped almost every behavioral output they have. But that delivery instinct, that deep wiring around the act of bringing something to someone whose presence matters, didn't disappear. It attached itself to you. Here's what the cameras capture when dogs are filmed in the moments leading up to their owner's return. In a 2020 study published in Animal Cognition, researchers used in-home monitoring to track what dogs did in the minutes before owners arrived home. Owners who kept predictable schedules. What they found was that many dogs began a specific behavioral sequence well before any auditory cue was present. Some began circling, some moved to the door, and a significant subset began searching, moving through the home, sniffing surfaces, picking up and setting down objects. As though preparing for something, the dogs weren't reacting to you opening the door. They were rehearsing the moment before you got there. And for the dogs who regularly brought objects, the search wasn't random. They tended to return to the same items or the same categories of items across multiple arrivals. This wasn't excitement producing random behavior, it was a dog selecting deliberately what to bring to you. That's not a small detail. That's intentionality. And intentionality in animal behavior is worth paying close attention to. Now let's talk about what's actually happening in your dog's nervous system when you walk through the door. The reunion moment, the arrival, the return, is one of the highest emotional peaks in a social mammal's daily experience. Research using cortisol and oxytocin measurements in dogs has shown that greeting a familiar, attached human produces a hormonal response comparable in intensity to other high arousal states. The system floods. For most dogs, that flood has nowhere structured to go. The intensity of the feeling is real and the behavioral output needs a channel. Here's where the object becomes something more than symbolic. Dr. Stanley Coren, one of the most cited researchers in canine psychology, has noted that carrying something in the mouth is one of the few behaviors that simultaneously occupies the dog's motor system and regulates their arousal threshold. A dog holding an object cannot bite, cannot bark as easily, cannot jump as explosively. The object functions at a neurological level as a self-regulation tool. Your dog isn't bringing you something despite being overwhelmed by your return. They're bringing you something because they're overwhelmed by your return. And some part of their brain has learned that holding something helps them stay in the room with you without completely losing control of themselves. The gift, in other words, is how they manage to be present for the moment they've been waiting for. And if you've been watching closely, you've probably noticed that it's not just any object. Dogs who bring gifts tend to have preferences, and those preferences follow patterns that aren't random. Some dogs bring their own toys, familiar, safe objects associated with play and positive experience. Some bring items that belong to you specifically, a sock from the laundry, a glove, something that carries your scent. That second category is the one that tells you the most. Research on scent and attachment in dogs has consistently shown that human scent, specifically the scent of a bonded individual, activates reward-associated regions in the dog's brain. A 2015 study at Emory University used fMRI imaging on trained dogs and found that the scent of their owner produced activation in the caudate nucleus, a brain region associated with anticipating things we care about, more reliably than any other scent, including the scent of familiar dogs. When your dog retrieves something that smells like you and carries it toward you, they are, in a neurologically literal sense, bringing you toward you. They are holding the closest available version of your presence in the only way they physically can. If that seems like a strange thing for an animal to do, consider how often humans carry photographs. Consider what it means to sleep on a partner's side of the bed when they're away. Consider the category of behavior entirely. We are not so different in what we reach for when the thing we want isn't fully there yet. Subscribe if you haven't already. This is the kind of content we're building here, and there's a lot more coming. Now here's the layer that most people miss entirely because it only becomes visible when you pay attention to what happens after the gift is delivered. Watch your dog's face in that moment. Not the tail, not the whole body, just the face. What you'll see in most dogs with a healthy attachment to their owner is a very specific pause. The object is extended or dropped, and then the dog waits, not for you to throw it, not to initiate play. They wait to see your reaction. That pause is everything. In 2023, a research group studying social referencing in dogs, the behavior of looking to a human to gauge how to interpret a situation, found that dogs show this behavior not just in unfamiliar environments, but in emotionally charged social interactions. The moment of gift-giving, they noted, consistently produced a period of intense eye contact and behavioral stillness in the giving dog, followed by behavioral shifts that tracked directly with the owner's response. If you smiled and engaged, the dog's arousal increased positively. If you ignored it or reacted with confusion or dismissal, many dogs either repeated the offering or showed subtle signs of deflation, looking away, lowering their posture, moving off. What this means is that the behavior isn't purely instinctual discharge. It has a communicative component that your dog is actively monitoring for feedback. They're not just giving you something, they're saying something, and they're watching to find out if you understood. The question is, what are they saying? That depends in part on the dog. But research on social motivation in dogs points to several consistent emotional registers that this behavior seems to express across different individuals. The first is what researchers call reunion bonding, the behavioral restoration of connection after separation. Every time you leave and return, your dog experiences a cycle of social disruption and resolution. The gift giving in that moment is part of how they actively participate in the resolution. They're not passive recipients of your return. They're contributing to it. They're doing something in the reunion, not just receiving you. The second register is harder to name in clinical terms, but easier to recognize if you've lived with a dog long enough. It's something like pride. Not pride in the human sense of ego-driven achievement, but the functional equivalent, like the behavioral state that emerges when an animal has done something in line with what their deepest drives are organized around. For a dog with retrieving instincts, for a dog whose ancestors were bred to bring things back, successfully completing that sequence in the presence of the person they're most attached to lights up the same reward circuitry as doing the thing they were built to do. Your dog isn't just greeting you. In some cases, they're experiencing what might be the canine equivalent of satisfaction. And the third register, the one most frequently overlooked, is what some researchers have described as offering, not in the sense of presenting a material item, but in the older sense of the word, a gesture of goodwill, a behavioral declaration that the relationship is intact. I see you. I'm here. I brought something. Everything is okay. Dogs who have experienced insecure attachment, repeated separations, inconsistent returns, households with high ambient stress, often show more compulsive versions of this behavior. The offering becomes more urgent. The waiting for a response becomes more intense. Because for those dogs, the gesture isn't just social, it's regulatory. It's how they find out if the world is still safe. There's a practical dimension here that matters, and it's one that most dog owners handle in exactly the wrong direction. When a dog brings you something and you immediately try to take it and throw it, you're interpreting the behavior as a request to play. Sometimes that's accurate, but often what you're doing is redirecting a communicative gesture into a game, which the dog will usually accept because dogs are adaptable. But it doesn't address what the behavior was actually doing. Dogs who are never allowed to complete the gift-giving sequence, who always have the object immediately co-opted into a fetch game, sometimes escalate the behavior. They bring more objects. They bring larger objects. They become persistent in a way that starts to look like demand behavior, but is really closer to something else entirely. They're still trying to complete the sentence. What the research suggests is simpler than most owners expect. Let the dog give it to you. Actually receive it. Make brief, warm contact. Let them see that the exchange happened. Then, after a moment, after the pause has been honored, move on to whatever comes next. The behavior isn't asking for a response that lasts very long. It's asking for a response that's real. There's one more finding worth sitting with, because it changes the frame on something that happens in millions of homes every day. A study tracking gift-giving behavior across different household types found that the behavior appears significantly more often in dogs who spend longer periods alone. Not every dog who is left alone brings gifts, but dogs who bring gifts are disproportionately dogs for whom the return is the emotional event of the day. This isn't pathology. It isn't neediness in the pejorative sense. It's the expression of a bond that is real and deep and organized around your presence in a way that most humans don't fully register until they're holding a damp tennis ball and looking into a face that is quietly, completely, waiting for them to understand. Your dog has been thinking about this moment, not in words, not in plans, but in the language that their nervous system speaks, which is anticipation and arousal and the selection of what to carry toward the thing they love most. And when they finally hold that thing out to you, that sock, that stick, that improbable leaf, what they are communicating isn't complicated, even if it took decades of behavioral science to say it clearly. You came back. I wanted to be part of that. If this changed how you see what your dog is doing at the door, hit like. It takes 2 seconds and it means the world to this channel. And subscribe, because every week we go this deep on the behaviors that most people watch their dogs do without ever fully understanding. Does your dog bring you gifts? What's their signature item? Tell us in the comments. The answers tend to say a lot about the dog and about the bond. We'll see you in the next one.